what we're really asking, most of us, is how can I be happy because I feel like I'm fulfilling my purpose and calling? And in doing that, it creates this sense within me of joy. And we're all looking, I think, for that.
Like millions of people around the world, we need to work. Some do it for the money, others do it for the recognition. And if you're lucky, you do it because you love it. But finding purpose and passion in your work can be easier said than done, and the path to success can be unpredictable at best. Maybe you love your job, maybe you hate it, or maybe you're just going through the motions. But if you're looking for some inspiration, then I've got one question for you. Are you consuming your career, or is it consuming you? Welcome to Consuming Careers. Is it really possible to have a calling or a purpose? And if so, is it possible to know your calling with certainty and clarity? Hi, I'm Bruce Smith, and in this episode of Consuming Careers, we're meeting with Jeff Feldhahn, who shares his experience of how he found his calling and the principles he applied to finding clarity in his purpose. So let's jump right into my interview with Jeff. Welcome back to Consuming Careers, and I'm excited to have a good friend, longtime friend, on kind of a dreary Friday afternoon here at...
But it's Friday.
So it doesn't matter what it looks like outside.
That's right.
I've got Jeff Feldhahn with me today. Jeff, really appreciate you joining me today.
Oh, Bruce, it's a pleasure.
So we've kind of landed in a unique place here, haven't we? This was not the plan.
No, it wasn't, but I like where we've landed.
Where are we?
We're at a neighborhood eatery called Dagwoods. It's in Peachtree Corners, which is one of the northern suburbs of Atlanta.
Yeah, so we walked in here. We were actually going to go to a hot dog place. And when we walked in here, it's relatively empty, and we found the owner, told her we were going to do this podcast, and we said, tell us your story. And I knew about 1 inch of it, but then we got the mile.
Yeah, it's
when
an
we
awesome
sat
story.
down. And they've been here for over 40 years. And what's the story? It was a band, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was started by 4 guys. They said just really to hang out with their friends and kind of get high, I think. They wanted a place, and so they opened a restaurant and then found out that it was work.
Yeah. Well, if you go on their website, I think it's softened a bit, saying 4 guys in a band that needed something to make some money along the way. The owner described it a little bit more graphically.
Exactly.
About what really happened
and
here.
maybe skirting outside of the legal laws of the day.
That's right. This is off the record, right? So that's great. It really is a fantastic place. I could see, a little league team coming here, after a game, a lot of, wooden chairs and booths. And I'm telling you, if you haven't been here before, they have a pizza.
It's amazing.
That is about the size of a wheel, of a 16-wheeler. This thing is huge. I don't think they make pans big enough for this pizza. It's crazy.
Well, this place really is a neighborhood establishment. I live within a quarter mile of the place.
Right.
And was just talking with our neighbors. We live on a little cul-de-sac, and all 4 households were together. And one of them said, Dagwoods is doing trivia again on, I think, Monday nights maybe.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, we're all in.
Yeah.
Now that our kids are grown, we're coming up here and we're going to dominate.
Awesome. Well, Jeff, for the audience, can you just share kind of like, who are you? What do you do now? Like, how do you answer that at a cocktail party?
Yeah, that's it, and it's always a head scratcher for me because I do a lot of things.
Okay.
I'm a lawyer by training.
That's right.
So I do practice now. Didn't practice for a number of years, but I do practice now for, maybe 20 plus hours a week.
Okay.
A couple of long-term projects with a couple of big clients, which is good. It's a skill set that I hopefully am relatively competent at.
Yep.
I also am along with my wife, we research and write books.
Okay.
And then we're often asked in various venues around the country to come and speak. And it's
great.
always on relationship topics and marriage. So we research, develop the data on, what is it that most men are thinking in this type of situation? Or what are most women wishing that their husbands understood? So those sorts of things. And, it's been hugely fulfilling and great. It's introduced us to people all around the country. So that's another thing.
You've been credited with 22 or 23 books, is what I saw online, and it doesn't lie, Jeff.
Yeah, well, that's mostly Shanti.
Okay.
I might be the brains behind the operation, but no, she's the gifted writer. I write with her on it's been a dozen or so, not a dozen, a half a dozen books together.
Yeah, that's great.
And again, it's just a privilege and it's a blast and love doing it. And that's kind of job number 2 or number 1, I don't know. Right. And then there's another job that I've had a technology startup company for a long time, and I think I can call it a startup. I'm permitted to, even though it's been many years.
Okay.
Until it makes money, I consider it a startup. And
there you go.
It seems like we are pivoting at least every 6 months to a year to see if something might take hold, and that's what we do.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna do a detour here. And before we get into your background, I'm going to ask a question about, of all your research in the books, even with Shanti, about relationships, is there any nugget that you could pull out that would directly apply to work and relationships at work, whether it's with a boss or peers or teams or customers? Anything that comes to mind that you'd say, wow, this is something that the workplace needs to hear?
Yeah, let me, it may be something that the workplace doesn't want to hear or believe, but men and women are different.
Wait a minute.
Yeah. And the issue is in at least in the relationship space.
Yeah.
What we have found is that for men and women, we both tend to have different deep insecurities that we are looking for answers to. And, for a man, and this is, what I am, so I'm going to speak to that one.
Yep.
Men tend to have an insecurity of, am I able? Am I good at what I do? Am I appreciated? And that causes all sorts of issues at work.
I bet.
If he doesn't feel like he is appreciated, or, and it can be something as silly as you're in a pricing meeting.
Yeah.
And you're a woman, and you ask a question, a totally legitimate question of, hey, Bruce, why did you choose that pricing for that particular project?
Right.
What men tend to do, maybe not Bruce, but as the statistically 70 or so % of men could hear that to be something like, why did you choose that pricing, you dodo? As opposed to, if she could just rephrase it in a way that says something like, Bruce, I know you had a reason for choosing that pricing. Could you help me understand what it is? It's just a totally different way, but it speaks to something that is deep inside of us men, that might be a wound. You should say, well, that's just coddling them. You got to suck it up and grow up. But look, if I went to a foreign culture, I wouldn't expect, if I know almost nothing about Japan.
Yeah.
I've never been there. I've never lived there. I wouldn't expect that they should just understand my Americanisms and that they should make accommodation for it. Instead, I would strive to understand them.
Right.
And I think that's, and I gave you just the example for
Sure.
a guy. The same thing can be for a woman.
How does
but
that
it's
play
different.
out for a woman?
Well, it's there is also what we found is in the workplace, women also want to feel appreciated and understood and all of that. But it's more of a internal, the question inside a lot of women, and this is more in the relationship space than in the workplace.
Okay.
But in the relationship space, it is, am I worthy of being loved? And I'm going to say that in the relationship space, not in the work space.
Yeah.
For who I am on the inside, I have an innate internal worth. And that's the question. Do people value me? Do people see who I am as a person, not as for the guy, what I've done.
Right.
It's more of who I am as a person. Am I being valued for that? And, again, it gets us all in a lot of trouble because as a guy, I don't live in that world.
Right.
And so I can unwittingly stomp on a woman's feelings or say something that might be okay in the workplace with another guy because that's how we relate.
Yeah.
But there is just in the belief that we're all just the same.
Right.
And our brain wiring is the same and all of that. I'm gonna resist that until the day I die. Because I don't see it. I don't believe the science shows it, and I don't believe we actually see it in our own lives.
Yeah, that's look. We didn't even plan to talk about that, but we could talk about that for quite a while. But that's some great, that's some really great insight, I think. And those who have ears to hear, let them hear, right? So, okay, we're gonna put a pin in that, and we might come around to it again, but. Let's just back up, and I want to hear kind of your story. Growing up in Michigan, right?
Yeah.
Kind of those first jobs, college, and then Michigan.
Yep.
But I want you can tell it, and I want to hear about the restaurant, which is awesome. Everybody needs to work in a restaurant.
Goodness, yes.
Sooner or later, you've
Yes.
got to work in a restaurant. So I'll let you just kind of run with that.
Sure. So, thanks, Bruce. So grew up in a small town, farming community, north of Ann Arbor, south of Flint. For those of you, if you meet someone from Michigan, they'll hold up their hand and they'll point to a spot.
Me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the spot where I would be pointing to is just to just a little south of the middle of the palm, closer to the thumb, but kind of southeast Michigan, and that's where I grew up. Wonderful place. 3 older brothers who beat me up every day of my life. And loving mom and dad. We didn't have a whole lot, but we had an intact family that I knew that they loved me.
That's great.
It really was, and it set me up well in life.
A little bit rare.
It is rare, and honestly, you don't realize when you've had certain benefits like that, what that has meant for you over a lot of other people. And you just take things for granted.
Yeah.
So went through a little small school and loved my school experience. I was a pretty good student, played sports, never going to go on and be a super college athlete or anything, but, that was it. And the idea was, after high school, maybe kind of sort of go to college. This was in 1980.
Okay.
So, seemed to be a good thing to do. In that time, though, when I was graduating from high school, two of my older brothers bought into a restaurant.
Okay.
My parents bankrolled them.
Wow.
Basically, took a second mortgage out on the house. Well, they actually took a mortgage out on the house because it was paid off, which was a small little house, but it was all they had and their life savings. Yeah. They believed in their boys.
Wow.
And this restaurant was in Flint, Michigan, which in the 1980s, Flint, Michigan's the birthplace of General Motors.
Yeah.
And lots of factories. And in the 1980s, General Motors was closing factories. And so Flint was kind of a hard luck place. We didn't really realize that when my brothers bought in. After my senior year of high school, I had started going to church. My family was good, salt of the earth kind of folks, but, faith wasn't part of our story. It became part of my story as I graduated from high school, and really became invested in a little church in Flint. And as part of that faith journey, I began to question, well, should I go to college? Is that what I'm supposed to do? Now everything seemed to be up for questioning.
Wow. Okay.
And I'd enrolled. I was accepted at the University of Michigan, and was planning on it. And then my brothers bought this restaurant.
Okay.
And as I was praying about what to do, I felt that I was supposed to not go to college and help them get it launched well.
Wow.
And the idea was that I would postpone going to college until the winter term.
Yeah.
Start at Michigan in the winter term.
Most teenage high school boys would interpret that revelation as go to college.
Yeah. Oh man.
Don't go work in a restaurant.
Oh man. Really. Yeah. My judgment is probably suspect from this point on. So we. I went to work with them.
Yeah.
And the restaurant didn't do well.
Wow.
And those 4 months of work turned into 7 years.
Oh my gosh.
And it was because they needed my labor.
Wow.
And I didn't get paid for those 7 years.
So you're just living at home.
I'm living at home with
my folks. Out of high school, working in a restaurant, 7 years.
7 years.
Wow.
I ate well every day.
Yeah.
My dad had retired at that point. Wow. Not because he could have retired, but because his particular business that he was working in hadn't been doing so well. So, it was one of those. So he retired, and my mom was a substitute teacher, and her substitute teaching salary funded the family. Now we live fairly, frugally, which was all okay. Yeah. And it was during this time that, my faith was really growing and trying to figure out, what does God want me to do? And all in my back of my mind, I really did want to go to college. Okay. But as the years were ticking by, I was thinking that option is probably getting a little more and more difficult with each passing year.
So maybe you might be like 24, right?
Yeah,
something like that.
24.
And at that time, were you really... I'm just asking. Were you really asking God for that, or were you just trying to figure it out?
I was praying
really
diligently for this.
Yeah.
I was asking God, because here's what I assumed in my asking of God. I assumed that I was doing the right thing in helping my family out.
Okay.
I think I was. I assumed I was doing the right thing in being faithful to all I knew to do, for God.
Yeah.
And I also believed that if I did those things, good things would happen. And the good thing that I was praying for was that we would sell the restaurant, my parents would be made whole, get their life savings back, and at least we could go from there.
Yeah.
So that was the deal, I thought.
Right. I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part, God. Now it's up to you.
That's right.
And so during this time, there was a little bit of a segue here, and I don't mean to create all sorts of theological questions for you in your podcast, Bruce. But we had a gentleman that would come to this little church that I was attending.
Okay.
Who would every once or twice a year, he would drive his little 1970 Volkswagen minivan up to Flint, Michigan, and hold a revival for 3 or 4 days. He was a 8th grade educated, backwoods Kentucky sort of guy, but he loved Jesus.
Wow.
And he preached, and he also listened to God. Okay. And he had a faith, and again, here comes the theology, controversy. he had the ability to hear from God and share things.
Okay.
In the Old Testament, they called them prophets. He would never have said that about himself. But let's just say from the guy sitting on this side of the microphone, that's what I would say about him.
Yeah.
He took a liking to me, and he used to ask me when he would come up, he'd say, Brother Jeff. He'd say, would you, on your lunch hour or whatever, sometime come over to the church and we can just sit and talk.
Yeah.
And when I would do that, he would say, is there a question you have of God that you'd like to have an answer for? And I would ask the questions to him. I would have to write them down because he was hard of hearing. And he would look at the question. He'd close his eyes for minutes praying, and then he'd open them and say, I think God would have you, and he would give me oftentimes just good old wisdom on it. Not necessarily, this is what you need to do, Jeff, which is what I wanted to hear.
That's right.
But it wasn't like that. And so this went on over those 7 years. Finally, in year 7 of the restaurant, things were pretty desperate.
Right.
I'm now 24, 25 years old.
Yeah, sure.
Thinking that life is passing me by. My parents, things are just looking bleak. The business hasn't improved. And our church gets a call from Brother Spears, who says, I think I've got a word for the church. Can I come up and deliver it? So, of course, they let him bring his little minivan, Volkswagen van up. And when he got there, he said to the assistant pastor, I think really why I'm supposed to be here is to talk to Brother Jeff.
Wow.
And they said, can we go over to his restaurant and talk to him right now? So they called up and said, do you got a moment? And, of course, I did. He came over, and with the assistant pastor, we went.
You're bussing tables.
I finished. I had someone else bussing while I was, going talking to the prophet.
That's right.
And so, sitting down in the basement next to the walk-in cooler and the number 10 cans of green beans
gosh, yes.
and Thousand Island dressing.
I can see it.
He said, "Why don't you got a question for God?" And so I wrote down on a piece of paper. I said, what should we do with this restaurant? He closed his eyes, he opened them, and he had this pained look on his face. And he said, close it down. And I thought, that's not how the story's supposed to end.
Yeah.
God's supposed to come through at the 11th hour.
That's right.
And change everything and make my parents whole. They're in their 60s, late 60s. How is this going to glorify God? I wrote the next question down. So, if he would have heard my voice, he would have heard the sarcasm in the question.
Right.
And the question was, well, what am I going to do? Because, after all, it's all about me.
Yeah.
What am I going to do? Go to college? And it was one of those ridiculous questions because where I was from, people don't start college at 25 years old.
Right.
And he looked, closed his eyes, and he said, yes. And if you will do beyond your wildest dreams. And I thought, well, okay. Well, there you have it. And I later asked him if I go to college, because I'd always thought about going to law school. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I'd had this dream.
Yeah.
And I said, if I go to college, I'd like to go to law school. If I go to law school, I'd like to go to Harvard. Can I? And he said, you can. And it happened exactly like that. I ended up going up, telling my brothers that we needed to close the restaurant. Within 3 weeks, it was closed. I enrolled in classes at the University of Michigan, took my classes, finished it by going, extra credit hours and springs and summers because I was used to working 80 hours a week in the restaurant. Finished in 2.5 years and got accepted to Harvard Law School.
Right after Michigan?
Right after Michigan.
Wow.
And, that was the first part of the journey. So, how do you replicate that? I mean, how do you say, well, that's a pattern here. Everyone can do this.
No.
It's just God's grace and mercy. But, I think for me, the takeaway is my job is to try as much as I can to be faithful in the job I have.
Right.
In Ecclesiastes, Solomon says, whatsoever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. And I think that's the way I tried to glorify God, even though, man, working 12 hours every day in a restaurant for no pay didn't feel real great.
Okay, so that's fantastic, and a lot to think about through that, and a lot to process. Okay, so no small feat to graduate from Harvard. Just getting accepted, right? And you're already 5 years late.
Yeah.
Right. So, not many people go to college at 25, let alone go to law school at 27
almost,
or what?
Yeah, 28.
Right. So, you into Harvard, out of Harvard, and then you start another 12-hour day job, don't you? I mean,
again, here's
law school.
My judgment might be really suspect. Again, I think I chose law because I thought it would be easier than the restaurant business.
Yeah.
But perhaps not.
Just using different muscles.
Just using different muscles. Yeah. So I'd met my wife, Shanti, while we were in graduate school. She was working on her master's at Harvard. And we moved to New York. We decided to get married, and we moved to New York after graduation. And she took a job on Wall Street, and I took a job at a large law firm there. And that was, again, the 12-hour days were the short ones. The 16-hour days were the more normal. And it wasn't so much the hours; it was the environment. I thought if someone was going to pay me a lot of money,
right,
I could clean toilets
right.
for all of those hours. There are some things that we are designed for. We need affirmation. We need appreciation. Particularly me as me. It might be my insecurities. I needed that, and I didn't get that in that environment.
But you practiced law for at least at that time in a traditional firm for like 6 or 7 years.
That firm was almost 5 years.
Yeah, and so you certainly had some perseverance.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
And was that energizing? Like maybe it probably was. Like you were learning, you're challenged. You probably making more money than you've seen in a long time.
I made more money in that first year than my parents made in 2 years of combined salary in the best years of their life.
Yeah.
Now,
so that can put a lot of fuel in the rockets.
It can, but here's the thing. We had $135,000 of student loan debt coming out of graduate school, and because we financed everything.
Yeah.
I didn't have any money from the restaurant business, and our student loans were what we did. And then living in New York, not so cheap.
Expensive.
Even in the 90s, it wasn't cheap.
Okay. So you're in the late 80s?
Late 90s.
Late 90s.
Mid 90s was working in New York.
Yeah. Okay. So what happened after that? Was there a time when you said, enough with this, law firm stuff? I'm ready for something different. Kind of talk me through that transition.
Yeah, that was I would put those 5 years. And while I love New York, I really do love New York, I felt that my personality was in danger of change, of almost permanent change.
How so?
I was discouraged, depressed. When you don't feel valued in what you're doing, or you don't feel like you are having valuable input, it sucks the joy. It sucks it did for me, the life out of me. And Shanti was, we need to get out of here.
So this brings up kind of the classic question around grit versus quit, right? And we talked a little bit about that before we started this podcast. So when you were looking at transitioning out of practicing law, I'm sure there was a voice inside of you that says, well, if I just bite the bullet, I might make partner, and
It'll get easier.
it'll get easier, and the money quadruple, whatever.
Yeah.
It
No,
just
no,
goes
right.
through the roof, and life just gets better, I think, right? Or you say quit, and if I quit, what does that mean about me? And what does that mean for the future? Because I'm a lawyer.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trained to do. That's what the certificate says.
Yeah.
That's what the bar says.
Yeah. So to answer that, Shanti was very unhappy. One, when your husband is working 16 hours a day, that's 16 hours that he's not with you or around you. So oftentimes, she would be asleep when I went to work and asleep when I came home. So we would see each other oftentimes awake
Right.
on Sunday mornings when we went to church. And then I would go to the office after I'd walk from the office, walk from church to the office. But so it didn't feel like, you got to I reframe it, the quitting versus grit. I may be quitting on one thing, but I'm choosing something else. So I was quitting on that life in New York at that particular law firm.
Right.
But I was choosing my wife and our relationship and our future family. I think, at some point, if you don't quit on one thing, you can't do everything.
Right.
You maybe quit on something else. And, God in his mercy allowed me to, at least a lunkhead, to see what was most important in my life.
That's good. Yeah.
And so we decided we had an opportunity to move to Atlanta and work at a much smaller law firm.
Okay.
And Shanti had the opportunity to, she had left Wall Street and was had been recruited to work at a nonprofit organization that was having a real reach into some overseas countries.
Oh, wow.
And she was encouraged that could be done from anywhere. So opened up a whole bunch of opportunities for us to move to. We didn't have family in Atlanta, but I had my law school roommate who gave me a call and recruited me, and that was all it took.
So that's good. So around the
turn of the
1998. Well, I mean, the quit versus grit. You were using kind of the lens of more the holistic, right?
Yeah.
So you knew that maybe the money wouldn't be there for the career. There wouldn't be the career progression at that law firm. All the equity, job equity that you earned would be kind of lost.
Yep.
Especially moving to Atlanta. But what you were saving was relational and something maybe more valuable that you perceived as more valuable and longer lasting.
And it's true, Bruce, and I don't take this for granted how amazing a spouse who's in your corner can be.
Yeah.
And I tell you, I will. The moment Shanti says, "I don't think you should be doing this," I'll quit.
Yeah.
And there have been hard things that I've wanted to quit, and she said, "You can do it. Keep going."
Wow.
And I'll keep going. And she says those things not without cost to herself. I can trust her.
Yeah.
And so that's my grid in quit versus grit.
Yeah.
If Shanti says, "I'm with you. I'm going with you on this," I'm going to go. And, I don't take that lightly because I know that there are folks who are listening to this who wished with everything that's in them that they had that with their spouse.
Yeah.
Or had a spouse that they could have that with.
Or heck, even a friend.
Even a friend.
Yeah. Okay, so I think you spent a year with that law firm in Atlanta.
I did,
right?
roughly a year and a half, and then the whole entrepreneurial bug that was there, why I went into the restaurant business in the first place, because, I liked the thought of building things, creating things.
Right.
And the internet wave was happening, late 90s.
Late 90s, that's right.
And so I joined a group of guys, and we made a internet startup that, we raised a whole lot of money and spent more than we raised. And then 9/11 happened, and we'd created what I thought was a compelling, cool piece of technology, but we'd had no money to get it to market.
Right.
And there was no more money coming after 9/11.
Right. That's right.
So we ended up closing the doors. I ended up keeping things afloat for a while and had a couple of key guys that stayed with me. And since I was used to the restaurant days of earning no money, I thought we'd try this again.
I remember this feeling.
Yes, I know what this is like, not to earn anything.
Hey, by the way, if you recall, 1999, 2000 is when we met, right?
It is when we met.
So serendipitously,
it is.
I was doing recruiting at the time, and I think one of your investors or private equity called our firm and said, "Hey, these guys need some people.
We need to search because these knuckleheads they need a real CEO.
They don't know what they're doing." So I remember and meeting you.
Yeah.
And that was probably only that one meeting in a conference room talking about what's needed on the team, and as a recruiter, once you hit my Rolodex at the time, or my whatever at the time I had, it just never left. So, relationships and contacts are key to any recruiter. So I remember keeping that, but I do forget when we reconnected. I don't remember what it was. What was it?
Our kids were in school together.
Our kids were in school. That's right. So our kids went to school, and I'm
like in second grade or third grade, something like that.
Yeah. So that's when it reconnected. Yeah. So I think my daughter was in the same class with Luke. That's right. So that's so funny. So look, when you live this long, it's bound to happen.
It's bound to happen.
All right. So what's the name of the company, and is it still around? Like, what's happening with that?
20 years.
20
plus years.
What's the name of the company?
It's called World to One.
Okay.
I can't explain the technology here in an elevator pitch.
That's all right.
I've only had 23 years to try to refine it.
That's right.
But it's because we pivot every 6 to 12 months to try to see if a little tweak here or there. And so what this does is it kind of goes to the point of quit versus grit. Why in the world would you keep going on something like this, Jeff?
Jeff, why would you keep going on something like this?
It's because I love doing it.
Okay.
I love the idea of solving puzzles or putting pieces together to see if we can make something work.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
Other people have hobbies. I have trying to build or create something, and I've got a group of guys who believe in me, and they have all the skills, development skills, etc., hardware skills needed for this particular technology.
Yeah.
And they're in. So I'm in, and Shanti's in. So even though it doesn't make money and we pivot and try, I'm hopeful, Bruce. I think God's got a good story. And whether or not at the end of this story, you'll be reading, the first page of the Wall Street Journal someday and go, Jeff Feldhahn, wow, that company. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, he has shown me during this whole time things about myself that wouldn't have been teased out any other way.
Like what? Give me an example.
It is the... I want so very, very much for God to say, this is what I want you to do, Jeff. And if you do this, then this will happen. I really want it to be transactional like that.
Yes.
But instead, over these 20 years, what I've felt is that in that relationship with him, it's not transactional like that. It is abiding. It is, come with me. Or, Jeff, you know what? This is important to you, so it's important to me.
Wow.
I see God kind of saying that. And the world doesn't need another technology company of this or that. I could accomplish my purposes without that. But this matters to you. So let's figure this out. And this sense of walking for these number of years in prayer and in feeling that this is where he has me. And at least as of this dreary Friday afternoon, we're still paying our mortgage.
Yeah.
He has provided opportunities for me to do lawyering, opportunities for Shanti and I to write books and speak. And you piece them all together at the end of the month, and you pay your mortgage, and you live your life in a way that I think you try to glorify God as best you can.
Okay, so would you in any way equate success with hearing and following your calling?
Gosh, that's a really hard question.
Yeah.
And I think it is. I would equate success. I would just choose to define success way different.
How would you define it?
Is my life, do I feel like I am listening, following as close to a relationship with Christ as I can? Is my job hindering that, permitting that, encouraging that? And is my life with my family and my wife, is it good? That is what I measure as success.
Yeah.
Not whether or not, I have so many commas in my bank account.
Right.
And it's hard as a guy. I mean, because I love data. I love to have markers that can go there. Yes, see, that worked. And I'm left in a space here with the data the data that I would ordinarily look at, such as a retirement savings account or, a recognition in a particular industry.
Yeah.
It's not there. It's not there.
So you're clearly attaching your calling and your purpose to God. Clearly.
I am.
What would you say to somebody who that's just not where they are?
Yeah,
right?
no, I get it.
But what tools do they have? Would you offer to have a better understanding of, I think intrinsically people want to have a calling, right? They want to have a purpose. They want to have like this North Star that they follow. And maybe it's, hey, I'm really good at baseball, and that's my North Star.
Yep.
Or whatever that excites them. So there's something in them that kind of drives them and excites them about that end game. How do they get clarity around that?
Yeah.
Is it? I mean, are you just saying that God is just how you define it, and it's the same for everybody?
Yeah. I think here's if you don't share the same kind of faith perspective that I share, I think it comes down to a couple of things. Calling,
okay.
And I think it comes down to, are you good at what you want to do? And do you like it? For me, if I loved playing baseball, I love playing football, but I'm 5'9", and I'm pretty slow.
Yeah.
So neither of those were going to provide a professional career. I would have loved a professional career, but it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, can I use a couple of movie quotes?
Sure.
I was thinking about these, and you when you talk of calling, I mean, everyone knows, the Chariots of Fire passage where Eric Liddell is talking to his sister, and he says, "Jenny, you have to understand." He said, "God made me for a purpose, for China, but He also made me fast. And when I run, I feel His pleasure." And that is when you feel that pleasure in what you're doing, and I would say God's pleasure, man, that's pretty darn close to my idea of calling.
So I'm getting back to success.
Yep.
And when you put objective eyes on World of One, and we're saying, so where's the IPO, right? So
exactly.
It's been 20 years. So where's the IPO?
Yeah, right.
And And many people would have given up by now.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know.
I think most sensible people
But there's
would.
something else pulling you through. There's
Yeah.
something else driving you, calling you to persevere.
Yeah, and it is that. You look, I struggle like everyone else in trying to discern God's leading and direction for my life. I do. I wish He made it abundantly clear.
It would be nice.
There are some points in my life where I've felt that there was a level of clarity in certain decisions. But for the most part, it's been, okay, I felt I had a level of clarity when I started on this particular path. And until I feel somewhat of a level of clarity for a different direction, I'm going to stay on this path. Now you can go.
That's practical.
Yeah, my goodness. But here, the other part is, there is something, and I will put this to a faith relationship, something about trying to just reach for those things that you can't quite see or understand, but you believe are in front of you, and you believe that God is leading you to, even though you don't know the outcome. So, second movie quote, The Shawshank Redemption, which Shanti will not watch with me because it's too brutal. And I tried to tell her
it's an awesome movie.
It's one of the most beautiful movies ever made.
Shanti, if you're listening,
yes,
it's an awesome
movie.
There
you go. Thank you, Bruce. So, at the very end, we have the Morgan Freeman, Red, the character.
Yes.
And he's standing waiting to purchase his bus ticket because he says, I'm about to break the law for the second time in my life. And then you see him, and he's sitting at the window of this old vintage, well, it wasn't vintage, it was 1965, Greyhound bus. And he says, as I sit here, I'm so excited, I can barely sit still or hold a thought in my head. I think it's the excitement that only a free man can feel at the beginning of a long journey whose conclusion is uncertain. I hope I can make it across the border. I hope to see my friend and shake his hand. I hope the Pacific is as blue as it's been in my dreams. I hope. And to me, that when I watched that the first time, in the 30th time, it makes me cry.
Yeah.
Because hope of something that you can't see, but you know it's out there. And I don't know if that successful IPO or whatever you want to call it is for this technology company. But I have that excitement because the conclusion is uncertain, and because I feel his pleasure as I'm embarking on this, and I have my wife telling me, okay, let's just keep going.
When you fast forward to that date, whenever that happens, do you anticipate the fulfillment coming from accomplishing something or serving somebody?
Yeah. I don't know, but I do. I don't wrap it up too much in the accomplishing something.
Okay. Right.
I don't. I mean,
which is internal. Which is
internal. It is. I'm a different person, and it's more of what's been accomplished in me. Now, we took a lot of investor money, and you could go, well, that, to spend several $1 million on accomplishing something in you, Jeff, I'm sure those investors are happy that it accomplished it in you, but they would like a return on their investment.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so that's where I'm still going. I still have those investors in the enterprise.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, belief in God does not negate the world and the economy that He's created us to live in, right?
Exactly.
So we're supposed to flourish and grow community, and that doesn't happen without, I know in the Bible, Jesus Christ talks a lot about money.
He does.
And there's a place for it, and there's a purpose for it. So it's not to be taken lightly or neglected.
No, at all. And I think working with excellence in wherever you are planted is critical in your own happiness, in your own joy. Because, ultimately, I think if we keep drilling down to the question of what's my calling, what's my purpose, what we're really asking, most of us, is how can I be happy? How can I be happy because I feel like I'm fulfilling my purpose and calling? And in doing that, it creates this sense within me
Yep.
of joy. And we're all looking, I think, for that.
Have you always felt that? Even, I mean,
No.
you've got Bishop Oscar Spears, who
Yeah.
gave you a prophecy about university going to college.
Yeah.
And all of that, right? So that was part of the plan, apparently.
Apparently.
So were you feeling the joy then? Would you say you were following your calling then? Through law school?
Oh, yeah.
And while you're working in law firms?
Yeah, I mean, again, I didn't feel the joy. I think I lost it, but it didn't negate what I think God's plan was.
Okay.
That even if his plan would have been, don't take that job in New York, boy. What are you thinking?
Yeah.
Even that, he can redeem even those dumb, boneheaded things that I've done, and I've done plenty.
That's right.
And that is, I certainly didn't step perfectly. Once, Brother Spears said to do, embark on this journey. I flubbed and dubbed all along the way, made poor choices at various points.
So my friend Brandon Lee, who I interviewed in a previous podcast, is working on a project called, I want to say it's rowboats. And his point is when you're in a rowboat, you are sitting backwards in the boat. And that's how you steer and row and move forward. He said, but you do that by looking backwards. And, going through those law firms, and if they weren't joyous or pleasurable, there is a journey that I would say brought value to your experience, that God walked you through with a purpose, because it's not all supposed to be, if you're following your calling or your purpose, whatever you want to call that, that doesn't mean
easy.
It doesn't mean easy, and it doesn't mean pleasurable.
Right.
It may be the very, very opposite.
Right.
So that hindsight, although painful, and this is where the admonishment of grit comes in, I think. Although you don't have that 20/20 division when you're young. You don't have that context. But God uses that and reminds you of it as you move through your career and your life. And all of that is just great, maybe ammunition to supercharge your relationships, your purpose, your focus, so you know where not to waste time.
Yeah.
Right. The importance of pursuing this calling or this thing that you're after, right? And it clarifies a lot of decisions, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
You and I are both, we've talked about this, lovers of podcasts and information. I love these things. And I love the kind of positive psychology podcasts where they talk about psychological studies that have been performed. And one I heard recently was of a field of psychology. It's called narrative psychology. And they've found that people who are happiest, rate themselves consistently as happiest with their lives, they look at their past and they form a narrative. We all do about it. And they look at their narrative and they see those moments of challenge, of difficulty, and go, but it brought me here or there. Right. And they reform their story as opposed to, I was mistreated so poorly there, and that kept me from that promotion. And therefore, I have a right to be bitter.
Yeah, that is a huge life hack, I think.
It is.
It must be mastered.
It has to be mastered, and I'm working on it. But it does. If there's a scripture. My favorite scripture in all of the Bible is Psalm 103:2. which says, "Praise the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits." And I take that as the psalmist saying, looking back over my life, I acknowledge these parts where God intervened or did this, or I have two legs to stand on, or whatever it is, things that I oftentimes don't give a moment's thought to. I try to train myself to remember and recount things in my life that I'm grateful for, and that, by looking backwards, again, it can help you propel you forward.
And I'll share one real practical thing from just being a recruiter and interviewing hundreds, if not thousands of people over my career. And it's easy to see on the surface of a person how they relate to their past. If they're a victim, they wear it on their shoulder. If they have learned from it and are stronger by it, it just shows up in the way they communicate, the way they hold themselves, the way they act, and they're, if they've had some experience, have worked, you've seen the success. Because again, that's fuel for growth and creativity and freedom. Right?
It is freedom.
So, if you have that victim mentality, you are held hostage to that past.
For sure. And I love that a life hack. I think that is just fantastic.
Yeah. What would you say is maybe one of the more formative or life-altering experiences of your life that helped you reframe the way you look at life? Like maybe one of those things in the past that was maybe negative, maybe didn't go the way you wanted it, but you look at it and you're thankful that you endured it.
Yeah.
And you use that as a secret superpower.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a great question. I'd love to answer it with something I observed, but it wasn't my story solely. So when we moved down here from New York to Atlanta, Shanti took this role as this founder of this newly established nonprofit. It was supported by another ministry, another organization, a global organization. And she, had never raised funds or anything for a nonprofit. She was an analyst on Wall Street, had great skills, but, that wasn't one of them. And 3 months after we were here, she went out to a board meeting in Palm Springs and was fired because she didn't meet the needs. And so now all of a sudden, here she is. It's spring 1998. She knows no one in Atlanta. She has, her network is all in New York. She has, we have no family here. So she, for about a month, cried and trying to figure out what she was going to do with her life. And, that was a perplexing question for both of us.
Sure.
Because we still had those student loans.
Yeah.
And so she was going through a Bible study at the time called Experiencing God. It was big in the late 90s.
Henry Blackaby.
Exactly. Yeah. And Blackaby had shared in one of the days that she was reading was the reason why we don't oftentimes answer God's calling or call to various activities in our lives is because we look at it, we make an assessment that I can't possibly do that, and so therefore we don't. And he says, but that's kind of the point sometimes. Maybe without God's help, it's destined to fail.
Yeah.
So she kind of thought about that, and she was praying and thinking, well, what should I be doing? In this same time frame when she was trying to figure out a job, she'd been thinking about one of the things that she was fascinated with on Wall Street during that particular time was the whole, remember the Y2K issue? The year 2000 computer virus.
Right.
It was called early on. Well, she had to analyze large financial institutions to see their kind of how they were answering that particular risk factor and trying to resolve it. she'd heard a lot of stuff kind of in the Christian community about it being the end of the world.
Right.
And she said that, and you need to really kind of just grab the dog and the shotgun and head for the hills. And she said that just didn't seem like the picture of Jesus. Even if, she said it was legit. These financial institutions were concerned. So she said, so is there something, a middle ground, for this? And so she was just kind of pondering that. And one day, because of this Bible study, she was praying and she felt God. I'm going to give you the date. It was a Monday. Okay. It was a day. It was a Monday. And she felt God kind of nudge her that, I want you to write a book about this. What you're thinking. And she thought, well, that's the craziest thing ever.
Yeah.
I've never written a book, never wanted to write a book, no interest, and I don't know how to, and I don't know anyone in publishing, and we're talking a topic that has a pretty short shelf life.
Right.
It's 1998, spring of 98. So you got to write a book, get it published, and sell it before 2000.
You're right, before the end is written for you.
Exactly. So she calls me up. I'm working at the law firm, and she says, I think I know what I'm supposed to do. And she tells me this story, and I thought, well, that's kind of crazy, but maybe it'll stop her from crying. So it's good therapy.
Yeah.
So that was where it was.
Wow.
On Wednesday, she had a job interview. At that job interview, which she had set up a couple of weeks earlier, she was working, going through, interviewing, talking to all the people at this particular firm, and they loved her.
Yeah.
An HR person at the end of the day said, so, if it sounds like we're getting some good feedback. If we were to make you an offer, when could you start? And she kind of immediately thought, well, goodness gracious, this is where the rubber meets the road. Do I believe that God asked me to write a book, or not? And so she went to the person, but she didn't want to tell this person, this HR person, this. She said, well, I'm actually in the middle of a project right now. And the woman says, oh, well, what's the project? So sheepishly, she says, I'm writing a book. Oh, and what's it on? And she said, well, it's on a Christian response to the year 2000, or the Y2K issue. And the lady says, wow, I didn't know there was a Christian response to it. She goes, yeah, that's kind of the point. And so that was it. And then this woman leans over to her and says, do you have anyone advising you on the publishing business? And Shanti knew that this other person was a person of faith.
Yeah.
Said, no, but I've been praying about it. And she said, well, one of our senior executives here used to be in publishing. And wait, I think I hear his voice outside my door. And she ushers in this tall Australian gentleman. She introduces Shanti to him, and she says Shanti's writing a book. And this guy's very polite.
Yeah.
But, if you've ever been in publishing, everybody's writing a book. So, he kind of said politely, well, what's the book on? And she explained the name, the topic. And he started to laugh. And she went, oh, no. And he said, you're not going to believe this, but 4 days ago, I was having breakfast with one of the largest faith-based publishers in the nation, and they said they really wanted to publish a book on this particular topic, and if I ever ran across someone, would I let them know?
Wow.
So 2 days later, he agrees to be her agent. She has a contract. The book gets written in 59 days using all of her analytical skills, her writing skills, and it sells 400,000 copies.
Oh, my gosh.
And she was on every show, radio program, television, everything for about 18 months. Launched her writing career. To me, here's what this says. She was just walking her path the way that she normally walks, with pain and sorrow and sadness thrown in.
Yeah.
And God can intersect that in a moment and redirect. And so that is, when it comes back to the hope and the uncertainty of the future, I believe that we have a God that can intersect our path at any moment and change it. Does he always? No, not that I see in this world of brokenness.
Yeah.
But sometimes, and I am holding out hope that whatever it is with my technology company, whatever it is with the next book that we're writing, that he's in it. and that he's intersecting that path.
Wow. That's great. I may have to get Shanti on the next one.
Yeah, she would love it.
All right. Last question. So, looking over your career, or it could be current times, and you can literally interpret this question in any way you want to. But do you feel like you're consuming your career, or is your career consuming you?
That's a great question. I think, hopefully, in my better moments, I'm consuming it in that it's fun.
Yeah.
I get to work, I get to do legal stuff.
Yep.
I'm capable, I think, and competent at it. Is it what I want to do for the rest of my life? Probably not.
Okay.
But if it is what I do for the rest of my life, okay. It's okay. But for the most part, I love getting to think through issues and ideas with Shanti. I love, even though we don't make any money in the technology thing, sitting around with a couple of guys and going, but maybe, what if we did this? It's that engagement. It's that excitement of the unknown.
Yeah.
And trying to solve it. And just maybe, someone's going to say, oh, I hear his voice just outside my office. That one person that connects the dots together for you.
Yeah.
And that's what I hope. And that's what I keep walking, and I get up today hoping that that person or that incident or whatever it is that God brings across my path and does that.
I get the impression that, 20, 30, whatever it is, when you're on your deathbed, and
40
years, and you look back over your life, and World War I is still a startup.
Yeah, could be.
You're still going to look back and smile.
Absolutely.
That it was never about the destination.
No, and it is the journey. It really is the journey. Though I will tell you that has been hard won.
Yeah.
That has been hard won.
Sure.
I don't want to gloss over. There were so many nights curled up in the fetal position, and Shanti going, "You're going to be okay," and me thinking, I've blown it. I put my family in jeopardy, at risk financially. We got nothing. The future, who knows? Yeah,
That's
okay,
right.
we can talk
That's
about
right.
excitement about it, but it sure would be a little more exciting with a zero or more or two in that bank account number.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. This has been fantastic, Jeff.
It's been great, Bruce.
And very, very inspiring. Learned a few things about you. You see, I thought I had it all figured out. And there were some tidbits in there that were revealed today. So I want to say thank you. And Diana, the owner, while we were talking, she brought us some free pizza, some samplers.
Truly amazing.
So we got to enjoy those while we were talking. And man, this has been great. We're definitely going to come back here.
Oh, well, and I'm just telling anyone in the North Atlanta area, you gotta come to Dagwood.
Right,
and most
Peachtree
will know
Corners.
about it.
Yeah, that's right.
Because it is an institution.
Yeah, that's great. So again, Jeff, so thankful you took the time to do this and that you were able to kind of change gears at the last second and come over to Dagwood.
That's awesome. Thanks,
Great.
Bruce.
Thank you for joining us on Consuming Careers. If you've enjoyed the show, please click the follow button in your podcast app so you won't miss any of our future episodes. And if you have a minute, write us a review. We truly appreciate hearing from our listeners. And as always, I'm Bruce Smith, and you've been listening to Consuming Careers.